Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Kaya Morris. I use she, her pronouns. I am the one of the co-chairs of the Just Transition Subcommittee, and I want to welcome everyone that's tuning in to our subcommittee meeting here today. Very excited to talk more about the incredible progress that we've been making, both as a committee and the Climate Council, and its relationship to the work across Vermont. Joined here today by some of the members of our subcommittee and as well as some community members, and I'd love if we can have our subcommittee members to introduce themselves. Would anyone be willing to kick it off? Start off with Sarah. I have a list. Well, both Sarah and Jane are muted. So if I could get one of you.
Wait, I have to be unmuted, I guess.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. We've got an interesting thing happening here in the same room. So Sarah Phillips, I'm the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and I'm one of the co-chairs. And you want me to tag someone? I can tag Iris, maybe?
Hi, I'm Iris Chung. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a youth member on the Vermont Climate Council. Yeah, I can pass it to Virginia.
Hi, Virginie Diambou. I am with CVOO as a racial equity officer, and I use she and her pronouns, and I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'm going to pass it to Iris.
Well, I believe we got Iris, but thank you, Virginia. Chris? No worries. No worries. It's my job. Chris?
Chris Campbell, I'm Executive Director, Wyndham Regional Commission, appointed by the House to represent municipal interests. I'm a counselor, a member of the steering committee, and work with Kelly on liaising with the cross-sector committee. And I'll hand it off to Kelly.
Hello, I have a baby here who's a little bit fussy. I'm Kelly Klein. I'm the small business representative on the Climate Council, and I use she, her pronouns. And Chris said the other part about being also liaison with cross sector. So happy to be here, and I'll send it over to Claire.
Hi everyone, Claire McElvenney. I'm with the Department of Public Service and I am staff support for this subcommittee. So I will pass it to Jane.
Hi all, I'm Jane Lazarchuk, Director for the Global Warming Solutions Act. And Jennifer, maybe you didn't go yet.
Hi there, can you hear me? Sorry. Jennifer Micah. I am legal counsel to the Department for Children and Families, and I'm here at the request of the commissioner, who is the designee on the Climate Council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that everybody? Am I the last one?
Amanda.
Sorry, Amanda, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Amanda Carlson. I work at Capstone Community Action in their Climate Impact Division, and I am here staffing the subcommittee.
Fantastic. Thank you. Also joining us, Becca, did you want to say anything since we have a small crew? You don't have to. You are absolutely
Sure,
happy to.
I'm Micah Kuster. I'm the AmeriCorps member with Vermont Natural Resources Council. Really here just as a member of the public today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for coming together. So we did send out the agenda in advance. And so I hope you all had a chance to take a look at that as well as some of the incredible materials. Thank you so much, Sarah, for getting those out the door. Very, very much appreciated. So our agenda today is it's slightly hefty, so we're going to make our way through it to folks' level of comfort. Again, recognizing that we do have a quorum. We don't have the fullest body of the Climate Council here today. So we're going to work through folks' different levels of ease at either making decisions or making recommendations or postponing until we come to get greater input. In the interim between this time, just so that you know, in between this meeting and our previous meeting, there have been other other smaller meetings that have taken place. There's been outreach to members of the committee with regards to seeking input on a number of different items. So there has been a constant conversation, even if it's not fully represented in actual physical presence today. So just to make that clear for everyone here. So now that we've checked in a little bit, I would love to put up, if we can, the review and approval of both our agenda today, which I can go through, and then our minutes. So this evening we're going to have a member spotlight, which I'm super excited about, with Sarah Phillips. We're going to then go through talking about some of the revisions that are being proposed to the guiding principles based on feedback that we received from both members of the public, members of the committee, and the broader Climate Council itself. We will have an opportunity for public comment on those revisions. Again, we'll go through this a little bit more in detail when we get to each section. We're going to talk a little bit about the scope of work for a consultancy opportunity to support the guiding principles and implementation of the guiding principles throughout the Climate Council and its subcommittees. We're going to hear back from other subcommittees or steering committee and full council folks that would like to share, if they're ready to do so, around our comprehensive energy plan, technical stakeholder meetings. We'll also get some updates from Jane, and then we will talk about what we're going to do in August, which is right around the corner. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what our understanding is of what's next for the public engagement process. We will have another opportunity for public comment. And then at that point, hopefully we will adjourn for the evening. So I am looking for a motion, if possible, to, or not, just to see if we can get approval for with regards to the agenda, or if there's any questions about the agenda itself. I'm seeing no movement. Everything looks good. Oh, hello, Beverly. Hi, Beverly. Welcome. As you get connected up, we're just going through the agenda and preparing to step into the minutes and seeing if the minutes are approved by the group. But I didn't know if you'd be willing to introduce yourself for the record as we're just getting started. Hello, it's good to see you.
Hi, I'm Beverly Littlesender, and I live in Huntington. And I guess that's all I need to say about me. And I get in good trouble all the time. Glad to be back.
So glad to have you. Thank you so much. So, so again, I'm sorry, one moment. The world of Zoom life often involves in family and such, and that's a part of our work, as Kelly can rightfully speak. And I just saw my son run off with a bag of candy thinking he's eating that for dinner. So, all right, moving back along with our agenda. I just had to parent real quick. So I'm coming back to where we are here, looking at our agenda. Any further questions or comments on that? Are we good? Thumbs up. All right. What about our minutes? Any corrections, any additions? Anything that anyone has to offer with regards to the minutes? Okay, fantastic. All right. So now it is my pleasure to offer another member spotlight. We have so excited to be able to hear from Sarah, who has been an incredible co-chair and tireless supporter of this work, and I'm loving an opportunity to get to know a little bit more about Sarah and her work. Sarah, hi.
Yeah. Can I just say, Kaya, how much you just filled up my bucket with that introduction? Thank you so much. So I did make a little slide here to share a little bit. Let's see if I can figure it out. Whoops. All right. There you go. Something like that. Okay. So just a little bit more about me and who I am, where I come from, and I think I've introduced myself in the past as like I work for the Department for Children and Families. I'm the director at the Office of Economic Opportunity. I think I work in the best place to work in state government because our office gets to work with community organizations around the state who are working to address issues of poverty and homelessness and really promote economic mobility for very low-income Vermonters and work towards social, racial, and economic justice. So I actually really love my job, and But in the past, I worked at a community action agency. I also was in the Peace Corps in West Africa. Some youth development work.
Sarah, I am so sorry to interrupt. We're having a little bit of audio issues and you're getting into the really great stuff. So I'm wondering if it would work for maybe if Jane can try to mute and maybe you unmute, or if Jane gives you her computer, or I'm not sure which will work best.
Can you hear me now? Is this better?
Yes. Oh, it's a million times better. Thank you.
We'll try that. Sorry.
Thank you.
Uh-oh, I might still be an echo. Nope, I'm okay. All right, so hopefully it's not an echo. Sorry, guys. So just to say that I was, in the past, I worked at Community Action. I was actually in the Peace Corps in West Africa and lived in Guinea for a couple of years doing public health work of all things. It was a really transformative experience for me. I worked in youth development and service learning, which is really about community service, but really from a social change perspective. I have a master's in social work that I got years ago because I was excited about learning and graduate and school and just kept going and going. And that's actually was in social policy and evaluation and community organizing. So part of my personal background is that I actually grew up in the Midwest and in rural and small town America. I grew up in Iowa, and that's where both of my parents grew up as well. And we moved around a little bit. And then I went to high school and undergraduate in Buffalo, upstate New York, which is actually a very large urban area. So I've had a lot of different experiences of living in different communities, but I think I'm drawn, obviously, in living in Vermont, in a small town. As you guys have seen my background on the edge of the Groton Forest, I'm drawn to living in a rural community. And part of I feel like part of what has my values and my family history and experience is really coming from farming. So both my partner and his father and my father both grew up on farms, and there's a great joke in our family that gene skipped a generation, because that's definitely a part of what we value as well, although we do it on a very small scale, and partly because that's our values, is to farm on a small scale, and to do that in a sustainable way for our family and on our land. And I also recognize that we're able to do that because we're very privileged to be able to do that, to own land and to be able to farm. And part of my family background also is that I included it here on this slide as a Dust Bowl preacher and a local union leader. And just to say that those are two stories that loom large in my history, is that my grandmother's father was a preacher during the Depression in the Midwest, and really was very low income himself. And my grandmother's stories are definitely about growing up, and her family and extended family was about growing up in living in, like shacks and without running water and electricity, and living on the goodness of the congregation at some level, and really being a preacher in what was very, very, very low income rural white America, and that also that experience of faith and Christian heritage is definitely a part of my past as well. And then also on the other side is that my mother's father, grew up in that environment as well, and then worked for a very long time, and my uncles as well, in manufacturing, and was a local union leader. And so came from this experience of farming and organizing, and really you can see it even in sort of you think about the big tent evangelical preaching of the Great Depression, right? Very like community organizing space and legacy. And I think all of embedded in all of that is a value, I think, that was instilled in me to try to make the world a better place. And I think my life has in some ways been a little bit of a journey of trying to figure out what that means exactly and how to do that. And then I threatened Kaya that if I had to do a member spotlight, I'd put up a really embarrassing photo of myself. So that's me, and that's actually me and my siblings. And so one of the things that you wouldn't know about me unless I told you was that I grew up in a multiracial family, and part of how my parents felt like they were contributing to making the world a better place and their goals around social justice was to adopt kids, both through international adoption, and also my brother and my sister were adopted from foster care. So from a young age, I think have always been thinking and maybe aware of these ideas around racial diversity and awareness around that, and really questioning and understanding and trying to understand better both the experiences, lived experiences of my own siblings and family and who we were as a family, and also what that meant for who I was, and also an understanding, trying to understand more deeply the construct of race and inequality in the United States. So that is just part of me and where I'm coming from and what I think I'm bringing to this experience on the council. So, thank you.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much. And what a gorgeous picture. So amazing. I feel like there's a million stories just within that one photo right there.
That bike
So,
was awesome, by the way. Kaya. That bike was really, really killer.
absolutely. This is what we need. This is what we need. Thank you so, so much. Much appreciated. So, very grateful for this opportunity for us to be able to continue to connect with each other and learn more about each other in this very specific way. So it's a little bit less work and we get down to the people who we're trying to impact here within this work. So, what we're going to move into now is we're going to talk a little bit about some revisions that we're sorting through around the guiding principles. So, as you may recall, we've presented the guiding principles in a number of different venues, and throughout this period have been seeking input from both members of the committees, the subcommittees, and the public to get a better sense of where are these? Are there components that we're missing? Are there areas that need greater clarification? And have tried to coalesce those ideas into into potential edits. Now, just to remind everyone, the guiding principles are intended to be a draft document. They are intended to be a living work that we will continue to adjust and adapt as it will most bring the greatest benefit for everyone that's utilizing that work. So it is my understanding that Sarah and Iris and Jane and some others have been really diving into trying to suss out what people were bringing forth, as well as holding strong the vision that this group has put forth with regards to the guiding principles. That document should have been sent to you in the materials that were sent prior to this and should be made available on the state website as well. So we wanted to just carve out this space to allow for folks within this group to talk a little bit about that. So I'm happy to pass the torch or the microphone to anyone who wants to speak a little bit to that work and maybe even explaining any of the potential edits that are on there. So I'm looking to some of my great compatriots on this one.
Yeah, so oh man, I'm working on a really small screen, but I can try to, so thank you. And Iris and Claire and others provided feedback as well. I just want to acknowledge some people sent feedback today that I haven't had time to review or incorporate. So hoping that we can just use the time today to talk through it. And then also, Kai, just really thank you for acknowledging that we actually may need more time than we've scheduled on the agenda today for this conversation, and that's going to be okay too. So Iris and Claire, where do we want to, what makes the most sense in terms of starting this conversation?
I was looking at Iris to see if she had thoughts, but could potentially start. I think what we did last time was with the actual feedback document, which references sort of all the changes in the other documents you made or thinking about making.
Okay, and so I will share my screen then. Does that make the most sense for folks and we can look at it together? Okay. I'm going to stop my video and, oh. Come on. Okay, that's not helpful. That's not helpful. I'm getting there. Wow, who would have thought I could only do this with one screen? Okay, so, and this is the rubric. And so here is the summary feedback. So, and Claire and Iris, I can't both see people and show my screen at the same time. So just interrupt me, please. Or other people interrupt me. Okay, I can figure that out. Okay, so we took our task based on conversation as thinking that the goal was to summarize the feedback received and then provide a written response and include revisions. So this first part, I think, just is about, if hopefully people reviewed it, is just about talking about our process and what the document is doing. So I'm going to skip that. And so I think the bold is the summary kind of statement around comments. It's not really word for word on the comments. Sometimes it's multiple comments or just themes merged together. So I wonder if rather than walk through each individual, well, maybe we just walk through each one and we just pause. And if people have specific feedback about the summary comments or what Iris and Claire and I have written as a response on behalf of our subcommittee, people can give feedback as we go. Does that make the most sense? Okay. So when and how should the materials be used? And should we be scoring and ranking right now? And so we just, made a general statement, I think, as we've discussed, that it should be used right now to help in the drafting and shaping process, that the Climate Council will need to decide how to integrate this into their decision-making process. We do think we encourage them to use the rubric as part of the decision-making process. And we also recognize that they'll use other decision-making criteria in their process. I think that's pretty basic. Any thoughts about that? Okay.
Sarah, actually, I do have a thought
Yeah.
about that. This is Kelly. The answer, I feel like people were really concerned about whether we're supposed to be doing this as like a quantitative analysis with the rubric. Like they really wanted an answer. So is this trying to say, use it to identify blind spots, don't use it to quantitatively rank? Or I feel like the part that's not in bold doesn't necessarily answer that question, which came up from several people.
Yeah, so we summarized, if you read the whole document, we did pull that out as a separate comment and try to address that. Yeah, no, it's okay. So if we don't address that, and we tried not to be redundant in our responses, right? So if we don't address that well, though, please, Kelly, raise that. I think
and I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to read this as carefully as I would like beforehand.
Of course,
so I missed that.
Nope, it's totally fine.
Thank you. I'm noticing Jane with her hand raised.
Okay, I'm not sure how the echo is going to work. I just wanted to mention that later today we're going to be talking about the application of these tools and further refining how we support subcommittees in the council in their use of them. So I'm hopeful that as we think about how you all present these responses, that we can do that in a coordinated fashion with what we're going to talk about later today too. So hopefully folks will feel supported in their application of these tools. And I just note in the chat, the hope is that because it's a nice time in the schedule, that in August at the council meeting, we could present these guiding principles as final and kind of move for the council to adopt them as such. So this is really nice timing around this discussion.
Okay, so that kind of gets to our second comment almost, which was this like help, we need help in using these tools. And we said, we're here for you and we think you should hire a consultant. And then there was a little bit of a theme around information or data, and the data is not available. And so applying the principles might be more subjective, kind of a little bit of different comments around this. So we just said, yeah, we appreciate that the data isn't always there. That point, it's an important point. And yeah, we have named that Science and Data Subcommittee is part of their job to help work, identify, and fill those information gaps. We pointed to the fact that there's other ways of getting information, like through the public engagement process and listening to people. And then we said, even though we don't have the data, doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking the questions. And part of that is that it helps actually illuminate where we have gaps. So. Any other questions or thoughts about this one?
This is Chris. And sorry, I should wait to be called upon. Kaya, is that okay?
No, you're fine, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay. The one thing that we may want to suggest, maybe we don't need to be explicit, but to my mind, when we talk about science and data, I know ideally we'd have Vermont science and data, but I think also, citations of other scholarly works, good journalism. I'm not trying to get into the qualitative assessments here, but to my mind, that should definitely qualify. And there's a lot out there about that already. It may be broader, may not necessarily be unique to Vermont, but I don't know to what extent the Science and Data Subcommittee have really thought about that. I've tried to feed them some other information, like studies by FEMA about the benefits of building codes when it comes to climate resilience and adaptation, that kind of thing. But anyway, just something to keep in mind, because I'm not sure exactly how everybody's looking at science and data, but there are a lot of ways to get good quality and analysis and assessments, in addition to, of course, the direct engagement with people of Vermont about their experiences and what their perspective is. So just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know if you want to do anything with that or not, but yeah, that's just based on my sitting in. I haven't sat in on many science and data subcommittees, meetings, but that's just my perspective that they may not necessarily be thinking about that.
Thank you. And for those who may not be able to see, so Sarah's added some notes to incorporate those considerations just on the side, just so you're aware. Thanks for that, Chris.
Beverly, did you want to? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, and it's just a comment. And when people ask about wanting information or data to help them understanding historical inequities and potentially, identify impacted communities, I find myself feeling a little perturbed, because that information is out there, and that's something that, in my mind, and it's just in my mind, everybody ought to be taking upon themselves to learn and to understand, especially in this time in history when there's so much going on in the BIPOC community and in so many marginalized communities. We should not have to be the ones to spoon feed them. That information is there. And when I read that, I wanted to say, go look for yourselves. But again, that's my gut reaction. I just had to share it. Thank you for letting me vent.
Yeah, no, Beverly, I think that's a great point, and we could add that. I think, and Iris, Claire, correct me if I'm wrong, I think part of our I think it's
a great gut reaction, frankly. There is a lot out there, and maybe people just need to be reminded of, like, actually, there's more out there than you think on this already. And then I think also I'm reminded of our last conversation where, like, when we wanted to drill down to look, for instance, at things like energy burden at a town level, or include data around racial and ethnic makeup around energy burden, like some of that kind of data, we are lacking at the census level. So I think that that might be a little bit more what people were pointing to, but not entirely. It's a point really well taken. And I wonder if that makes sense as well.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So there was a comment here that the principals don't do enough. I'm sorry, I'm not monitoring the chat well either. So Kaya, please interrupt me if there's a...
I've got you. Go ahead, finish your thought.
The principals don't do enough to emphasize the status quo is currently inequitable and harmful, and we need to emphasize we need to change in order to reduce burden. And so we need an assessment question added or edited to emphasize this. And you know, we really agreed with this, right? If I'm remembering our conversation before. And so I just called out a couple places where we did say something specifically about this in the principles. And then we did take the recommendation that we could, we have an assessment question already. The assessment question was, does this recommendation maintain existing inequities or make them worse? And we added like, or improve the status quo. And then I think something for us to consider is we could, that's an assessment question. We could also add something to the rubric. And I think that Iris, you did actually draft this as something that could be added to the rubric as well. And I didn't add that in yet, but if you want to add that in now, that'd be great.
Thank you all. I actually do have a question around that. So the phrase improving the status quo, that feels like it's already answered itself. So if we're improving the status quo, are we saying we're setting a new threshold for what's considered acceptable, or what is our normalcy? Or are we are we actually improving inequities? Is that what we're doing when we're saying improving the status quo? Or are we just, you know what I mean? So like, it feels like, I don't know, there's the clinging to whether or not we're in the status quo feels, it doesn't feel as though we're trying to push towards a progress, but that we're saying little measures are okay. So I feel like maybe it's too positive around what it might be implying, and I might be just misunderstanding that. So
yeah, I think that's not what we were trying to say. So I think
like you're trying to address what the person had asked, and it might be an awkward question, and that might be part of the problem.
I think it's an awkward phrasing. Exactly. So this question was already in there, just to be clear. We already had this question: does the recommendation maintain existing inequities or make them worse? And it does seem appropriate that, well, hopefully recommendations are not maintaining existing inequities or making them worse. Hopefully we're doing something to do something better, right? We're like, so I'm not sure what the right phrasing would be on there, or if, you know, we want to rephrase the whole question.
Iris put in the chat, I'm sorry, Chris, I saw some unmuting, I apologize. I just wanted to note something in the chat, and I did see your comment, Amanda, I'll come to it when we're done with this section. So Iris put into the chat a quote that I'm assuming is going to go into the assessment document itself, the rubric, that the proposal outlines how it will create a future that is more equitable than the unjust status quo. So I think that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I think that's better wording.
Okay, so Chris remuted. Is there anyone else that has comments or would like to share? Hi, David. Okay.
I have a quick comment. I think I've also seen this question worded in an even more concise version, which was, does this proposal perpetuate the status quo or something like that. I think having shorter, clearer statements is also advantageous.
Okay.
Was that a suggestion for the rubric question or rubric prompt?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I like in the concise nature of that. My only worry would be that some people see the status quo as like a good thing, and creating like consistency might be something some people value and are like, oh, it does maintain the status quo. That's going to be a 3 for me. So I would like to make sure that it's pretty clear that we want to.
Good point. Yeah.
But I do like the short and sweet nature of that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe it's something like, does this proposal perpetuate the unjust status quo or something like that? Agreed.
Okay. I think we'll have to look at it like how it works in terms of the scoring, because you're scoring as you get
right.
The higher score is towards the more equitable just right version. So phrasing the question so that it works within that is something we'll have to look at.
Thank you. Sarah, and just real quick before we move on, I just wanted to note Amanda's note in the chat that was around looking to rejoice around some data and information that they may have that they've collected, as well as with the Vermont Law School. So thank you.
Yeah, they have a really nice map that overlays communities impacted by natural threats versus energy burden, and it just overlays a lot of the different concerns in one place. And I think we should reference it and pay respect to their work. It's really, really nice.
Great. And I just made a note because I think one of the things that we realized in doing these revisions is that we have a whole resource section that we had intended to put in our guiding principles. And so that sounds like maybe a great thing to think about adding to that section. Okay. So we have a little bit of work to do around this language, but generally I'm hearing from folks that the idea of strengthening this makes a lot of sense. Hopefully that's, I don't like when I can't see people. Okay, how do the principles address, this was a tricky one. How do the principles address global climate justice? Are they meant to, should they? Some comments emphasize a desire to recognize climate justice and climate impacts beyond Vermont. Other public comments noted that Vermonters might be tired of policies that are meant to just show that we're leaders, and instead of policies that are meant to show we're leaders, we should just focus on policies that are promoting justice, period. And then there was a very specific recommendation from the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, which is included here, to add that statement. So Claire and Iris, we really had a good conversation about trying to understand better this question exactly and its intent as well. So part of what we did is we just said, yes, we, recognizing our subcommittee has definitely had this conversation around the importance of what we do in Vermont. We're not an island, and it has impacts elsewhere, and we're accountable for those. And then, our principles, the legislature has made it clear that our focus is on Vermont. And so we had named that in our principles. So we just called that out here. And then I think part of our conversation, just to say, is that we weren't quite sure the intention of this, and maybe Kelly and Chris, who are on that subcommittee, can speak more to it. But if the intention of this question is to identify how the recommendation helps Vermont reduce greenhouse gas emissions or climate change impacts, and thereby the assumption is thereby it's contributing to global justice, then for us that seems like, well, that's kind of the whole point of the Global Warming Solutions Act, is that Vermont's doing its part to contribute, right? And so it didn't felt like it needed to be called out separately as an assessment question, because it's kind of like part and parcel of the Global Warming Solutions Act. we could though, so that's kind of where we landed. It's like it didn't necessarily need its own assessment question or make sense that way. But, you know, there could be other places where we want to talk about more specifically, coming back to this point around, you know, we are still an interconnected world, and we do still think global justice and thinking about global impacts is important. And we could strengthen that in some way. It's just that this assessment question maybe didn't seem like the way to do it. So I know that this is probably an area where there's great conversation to be had. But first, Iris and Claire, did I kind of reflect where we landed on this?
Yeah, I think so. The only thing I would add in terms of the question itself, Sarah, is that you had pointed out that the way it's phrased is kind of a yes/no question, and we had tried to stay away from that sort of phrasing. So if we were to incorporate something, it would likely need to be sort of reframed in like the way we've reframed the scoring rubric questions.
Yeah, thanks. Iris, you want to say something on this one?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah, I mean, I think that if we want to create a different question that calls out more specifically just our effects on people outside of our borders, more like we were talking about, like more like Hydro-Quebec or more like reducing our emissions. The way this question reads, at least I read it to be about reducing emissions, but also I think Chris has his hand up and maybe it's not. So I don't know, I would like to hear.
Thank you, Iris. Chris?
Iris, you broke up a little bit for me. Can you say it one more time about Hydro-Quebec? Because that's actually going to be something I was going to raise.
I mean, so there are just two separate sides that this question could be getting at. And one of them is like, what are the impacts that our like actions, like where we're getting our energy from, have on people outside of our borders, and not just considering people within our borders. And then there's also like, how are we reducing our emissions to make sure that we are doing our part? And then that is therefore justice because we are reducing climate change, which disproportionately affects like the frontline communities. So it depends on how this question was like framed and what the intention was, because I read it to be like, we need to, does this policy or recommendation make a meaningful contribution to global climate justice by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? But yeah, I would like to hear what you think.
No, I mean, I think that's it. And I've gotten lots of questions subsequent to the release of the principles about a lot around Hydro-Quebec, like what does this mean for Indigenous peoples and their lands and the flooding of their lands? I would argue, also add, you know, we have a lot of our energy is also coming from Seabrook. So what are we thinking about in terms of spent fuel and high level nuclear waste disposal justice? Because we have that issue with our own spent fuel. But and then like on some of the questions about you know, to the extent that Vermont becomes a home for clean energy development to let other states of New England off the hook. You know, so Iris, I think you're right. It gets the idea, I think in us getting asked this was about, you know, in the whole suite of policies, how does this affect other people? And are we, you know, across the spectrum, both directly and indirectly? So yeah, so it definitely included those kinds of issues you raised. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe then we could do a question, I guess. I think that the wording of that question, specifically, at least to me, calls out making policies that are going to set an example and reduce our emissions. And so I think that if we're putting in a question about just thinking outside of our borders and thinking about the people and communities and other living things outside our borders, it's probably a different question. But yeah, yes.
And just real quick, just on the issue about setting an example, because that came up too. Sarah, are we going to get to that one, that point that Annette Smith brought up and others on what Richard had suggested on using language about setting an example? Oh, this is it.
And we didn't want to use that language. We didn't. I think someone else had made a point, which I think maybe we haven't reflected well, but just I think that setting if the point of the policy to set an example, or is the point of the policy to do the right thing? And I think where we felt back was like, the point of the policy is to do the right thing. And that's, but, you know, we could definitely have a conversation about that today. But I think, you know, I don't know that we said it exactly that way in conversation, Claire and Iris, but I think that's where we landed on that, was that part of this wasn't something we felt like. But again, like, I'm not sure that this subcommittee has had this, you know, I think we talked a little bit about this when we reviewed the comment, but I'm not sure that we really got into this part of the comments very much last time around. So it did feel like Iris and Claire and I were just kind of having our own conversation about it, which is a good one. But
well, the way you characterize it is perfect, because that was the opposition to using that language about setting an example. Was the goal was do the right thing. I mean, set an example by doing the right thing, not have the goal set as the primary target being an example. And because the issue was there's just politics in Vermont about feeling like, is Vermont doing this because it's good policy, or are we doing it because we want the pat on the back from other people? And I think and I think the outcome of the conversations in other committees was exactly what you said, Sarah, was have good policy, and that by its execution will be the good example.
Right.
Thank you for all of that. If we can, we have a few more pages to go.
Yeah.
Here, and I do.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will think more about this idea of calling out something around impact outside our borders, and what that looks like. Okay. Yeah, we're not going to get through all these. I'm so sorry. So there's this other piece that we did actually have a great conversation as a group around individual action being accounted for in the principles, and that just for Vermont to reach its goals, individuals and communities, not just government and business, need to act. And so we just responded and said, yes, and individuals don't take action in a vacuum. And the whole point of the Global Warming Solutions Act is that government has to take responsibility and have accountability. And the whole point of the Climate Action Plan is that it's going to focus on what government and business does. And so, yeah, that's what we focused on. We could put in an example here, which I think could be powerful, because otherwise this just kind of feels like, you know, we could put in an example anyway. That's something we talked about doing. Like maybe Kashka has used the example around composting. So we could do that. And then we also just said, yeah, and also we spoke to we totally recognize that communities and families are going to need to take action, and they need capacity to do that. And we actually have a whole guiding principle on that. So that was our answer to that one. I think sums up the conversations of our group, but I want to hear back from people on that.
Virginia, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was not necessary to give a definition of what greenhouses gas emission is, because we never really defined what it was and the impact, the consequences of that. Thinking about the fact that this document that we are working on right now are meant to reach the larger public. I think those definitions are important for everybody to be on the same page. And I was also wondering if it is not necessary to maybe use a plain language that really everybody can understand. And in terms of plain language, I believe it is recommended that documents, when they are targeting a broader audience, be written in the 8th grade, I would say, language literacy. So just wondering about that.
So thank you for that, Virginia. I know that is something that we have definitely been talking, and I don't know where the state is around getting supports for finding vendors for that. I've reached out personally to VCIL, to the Green Mountain South Advocates, and to different groups, and we cannot find anyone who does that kind of specific work, which is unfortunate. That's a whole nother thing that we should figure out. But and I've also been trying to find contractors outside of the state as well, and have not had a ton of success. But that's something that we definitely need. So I appreciate you raising that. I don't know if Sarah or Jane, if you either of you have anything to add with regards to that particular comment or question.
Yeah, I think that's great, Virginia. I just made a note that, even though this document or our document is really the guiding principles, maybe it also needs to have just some key definitions as well in it. But something, if nothing else, I think you're speaking to a broader issue, which is around all of our communication documents being able to communicate it in plain language. If we do that. Okay. There was can the assessment questions better address concerns about town and community capacity? And yes, we should do this. So there was an assessment question already that was speaking around community trust and cooperation. And we added to that to really get at this. We already had a principle that spoke to this, but we just added to a question that is like, what capacity is needed and how will it build and or strengthen capacity? So that was our response. But again, I'm not sure how much. I think what we remembered from this group is that that's what people did want to add something, so we just drafted it.
Thank you. I'm just, as you're scrolling, I'll add to what Iris put into the chat as well. How does the proposal assess the impact of and account for the well-being of communities outside of Vermont borders and ensure that the actions will foster global justice?
Oh, Chris, you're so good. Okay, we'll get that added later. Okay. Okay. And then there was this comment around that the principles were addressing both like impacted communities and then also workers and labor, and a feeling that that wasn't necessarily well integrated in the document. And a specific suggestion that two parts of our principles be merged together. So we looked at the document to kind of look at this, and actually did make a couple tweaks to just rearrange some things to make it a little bit stronger, and added a statement so that it felt like through the whole document, both of those threads, and again, they're both of those ideas aren't separate, so it feels like weird to say that they're totally separate concepts, but we kind of worked to make sure that they were woven through the document a little stronger. And then we called out where we thought it was actually really strong, which was in our impacted communities section, where it, I think, really explicitly kind of calls out both this and I mean the whole thing, but this and this both kind of speak to those themes. So we just reordered some things, and we can look at that. I don't know if we'll have time to look at that, but and then there was just a general comment about sort of recognizing that the full cycle and this doesn't end with just publishing a plan. And we said, yep, totally agree. And we need feedback as well from people on our guiding principles, more engagement on that. And then this is where we talked about the rubric, and this is it overly quantitative, it loses nuances. And we said, yes, the guiding principle tools include both the assessment questions and the rubric, and having both of those tools honors people's different ways of knowing by providing different approaches to understanding and doing this work. We did look at the rubric, and we decided we could add sections for comments in the rubric itself that kind of called out the importance of narrative, because the point of the rubric is that it accompanies a narrative, but maybe people were missing that. And then I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I think it follows our conversation, is that it's perhaps less important than the overall score. It's just the opportunity to evaluate, right? It's the process of using the rubric that that is really important. And that we agreed that quantitative tools are imperfect, but this is our world. And to the extent that we're going to use other number-based tools and scores to make recommendations or decisions, then we encourage also using the equity score, which seems appropriate. So that's hopefully reflects the conversations of this group, but would love some feedback.
Virginie? Is your hand up from before?
Yep.
Not a worry. Not a worry.
Sarah, if you can scroll up, please, just a little. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. So yes, about the key, how do you call that? The key criteria. So we mentioned highly exposed to climate risk, experience oppression, but we did not talk about people facing difficulty with making ends meet. I think that's important to know that many people don't really pay attention to climate issues because they are so focused on completing the social determinant of health, you know, food, having decent and affordable houses and health, that they lack knowledge on climate issue or capacity to even address those issues. So I think it is important to point that out in our document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Virginia. I think that the second bullet is trying to get at that, but maybe doesn't do it quite in the way you're saying. So I made that note for us to. Would you agree that the second bullet is maybe trying to get at what you're saying, but it's not? What you're saying is a little bit different, is what I'm hearing.
Could it be perhaps that the word resources isn't automatically translating into talking about the economic components of it? Because resources could be anything rather than saying.
Yeah. Yeah, we could just be maybe a little bit more explicit. Okay. Thank you. Kind of going back to this rubric, I'm not sure. Hopefully, if there's no feedback, that means because, like, yeah, that's what we talked about.
Okay. Virginie did put into the chat as well something that we'll want to add to that document and in the comment section. So thank you.
Okay, great.
Do you want me to read that real quickly? It says,
Sure.
face difficulties making ends meet, such as putting food on the table, ensuring household members have a roof over their head. Therefore, the focus of the efforts to achieve these goals and ultimately lack knowledge or capacity to adapt to climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Virginie. That's great. Okay. Also in the rubric, this idea of negative values or weighing the principles differently, and we just said, no, we shouldn't do negative values because nobody should be putting forward any proposals with negative impacts. And then on weighting criteria, we seem to think that like, weighting criteria kind of was coming from a place of trying to make this rubric like perfect, and we just said the point is not that we're going to have this perfect score that can be compared to other scores, so that like a score of 27 is meaningfully different than a score of 25 or something like that. We don't see that the rubric's going to get us to that kind of analysis in terms of like what's best. And so it didn't feel like weighting criteria felt like where we should be putting our energy. But maybe we haven't responded to this exactly right. But I don't think that the group wanted to weigh criteria. I don't remember that. I couldn't remember exactly why not.
Okay, you're good.
Okay. And then the rubric shouldn't be used to rank recommendations. and the rubric is only going to be one way to rank it, and other ways include cost effectiveness, blah, 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 blah. And it's going to be challenging. And we said, yeah, the rubric alone is not enough to rank recommendations or determine which one's the best, even from an equity lens. But the whole point of the rubric, again, is that it's highlighting weaknesses and strengths. And there can be some general comparison of like low scores and high scores. And also, if your proposal doesn't score high, it sort of it illuminates and shows you like the things that you need to work on. And that, of course, our subcommittee appreciates that proposals are going to be look at a lot of other criteria. Okay. I want to be mindful of the agenda, Kaya, and so there is some changes to the rubric tool and just some language changes in the principles itself that are based on what we just presented, but we probably don't have time to go through them right now.
I appreciate that. I do want to honor that we were supposed to carve out a little bit of time for public comment. If there is public comment, I think we only have one member of the public here. However, I do want to also note, though, that there also in the agenda is talking about a consultancy opportunity for that. So it might be good to feel more grounded right here. I do want to also acknowledge again that while we do have a quorum, whether or not we feel like we have enough voices from the committee itself, that what we've said here today will set things in enough of a place that we will be able to make a clear decision for that presentation, as Jane spoke about earlier, for finalization. So I just wanted to name those pieces without giving you any really good guidance, and then, also noting that it looks like the changes to the rubric are not extensive, so I think it might be worth it just to get people a sense of where we're at. And I wanted to honor Iris, you naming earlier that Beverly had some comments as well, to ensure that we've somehow either touched those, or if we want to make sure that that's done in specificity. Were those about the so before we move to the rubric piece, is there anything in the principles themselves that needed to be named?
Were you talking about Judy's?
Oh, I'm sorry, Judy. Beverly's like, I have things to say too.
Yeah, if Beverly wants to go after, I'm happy. I would love to hear thoughts as well. But there were just a few specific changes to the actual principles that were mostly just changing of framing. One of them was something that maybe we should discuss. She wanted the principle around fairness to all living things to be a yes or no question, because she thought that was a better way to assess something, rather than having a like, oh, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, here's how it does. And she felt that was sort of the language that was used as a cop-out to allow it not to address how there's fairness to all living things. And then there were, would it be all right if I type them up into the document and then share them with, I can't share them with everyone, but I could share them with the co-chairs, and then we could maybe have them share them after that, if that works. Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you. That said, Beverly, did you have anything you wanted to say as well? Okay, thank you. I appreciate you. Just noting really quickly, Jane's note in the chat, I can share briefly on facilitation and talk through next steps, but do not need a lot of time. So we're going to keep going. Sounds great. Thank you. So the last piece on the rubric, the minor edits there. Are you comfortable screen sharing again, Sarah? Okay.
Yes, and give me a second. My computer's catching up. Okay, so not on the principles itself, because those we kind of just walked through how we made those changes, and people can see the specific. If you look at those recommendations, you can, they're based on what we just talked about essentially. So I'm pulling up the rubric. Okay. Okay, so that first one is just, it's not really that important. Okay, so so we talked a little bit about trying to get to a place where this rubric explained itself. Maybe that's not it, like explained itself a little bit more, so that you didn't have to have like somebody sitting next to you explaining how this rubric is meant to be used, right? So we were thinking about ways to do that. So one thing is that we could say something right here, like more of an introduction about using the assessment questions as a narrative and then using this tool. And also, by the way, don't forget to read the principles. And so we thought about if it's going to be a standalone document, that kind of introduction could be really helpful. We also could go the other way, which is like not making it necessarily a standalone document and like putting it into the principles itself, so that anytime you're going to look at it, you're like, oh, this is a part of a larger document that I need to read. So either one of those or both, honestly. We also, so I don't know if there's any thoughts about that. Maybe people want to chew on that a little bit. We thought about this 1, 2, and 3, like we maybe like a little bit more of a description here around like 1 is low, 2 is moderate, 3 is high, and maybe like just saying a little bit more about what that is meant to be, like why you would, like giving an example, for instance, like could help people think about 1, 2, and 3, maybe less subjective, maybe so that everybody is interpreting what 1, 2, and 3 means a little bit closer to the same. Although would never honestly really would get there. Okay, so those were 2 things. I don't know, before I go through the other things, if people want to have feedback on those. Okay, we added comment sections like directly underneath each of the rubric things. So you know, so people could add sort of some comments or narrative like right into it. Again, just trying to emphasize that it's not that the numbers are coming from something, not just like, oh, I think this is a 1. Oh, I think this is a 3, but like actually coming after some analysis on them. I just made a couple language changes here, and people may disagree with them. That's fine. But one of the things that I just have learned in working with my colleagues over at the Department of Aging and Independent Living is that older Vermonters tends to be understood as a better, more receptive, nice term to use than saying elderly. So so I used that term, but we could, you know, if people have strong feelings about it, that's okay. I added people living with low or very low incomes. Again, these 2 things are just coming from me, so we don't have to use them. I want to own that these are just my thoughts that I was adding to the document. But I know in working in work around like working in programs that are targeted to people with low incomes, that low income and very low income mean specific things to people, to some people who work in like government programs, and low income can really go up, you know, is a much higher standard than very low income, which tends to be people more living in extreme poverty. And so just wanting to kind of call out both of those things and thinking about that. We added a little section here on narrative on impacted communities. You know, one thing we could consider is whether we want a yes, no here, or whether this should be a 1, 2, or a 3 at the end. I don't know. And then we added a little thing on explanation. So if you're going to say recommended yes, you know, like add a little space to add some explanation. And I think, again, this is just to say this whole section is after it. And I think a lot of people didn't read this whole section. They just kind of look at the chart and the scoring table and didn't kind of read this whole section that said, hey, you should do this narrative too. So again, if we're going to keep it as a separate document, that's great. And maybe we just want to flip it and put the chart first and then have the rubric will follow or something. So those were our changes to the rubric. Not huge like overhaul, but just kind of adding some pieces to hopefully get towards more of the intent of how this group wanted that tool to be used. Any thoughts? There's got to be thoughts on this.
See some unmuting. I actually do like the concept of maybe a 1, 2, 3 on the yes or no. So, because it could be like I give a 2 and this is why. I think it's ready to go or it's not ready to go for these reasons, rather than yes or no, which isn't, is it ready or is it not ready? It could be like almost ready, but not quite,
Mhm.
So that might work better. I know there were some concerns raised about having that all together from some folks, but
So it could almost be like a yes or a yes with changes, or a no, kind of like almost thinking about it like that, giving an in between.
mhm.
Okay. Anyone else?
This is Kelly. Can I jump in? I didn't know if I
Please.
should raise my hand or what.
Please.
I was thinking, and you kind of touched on it in your little comment there, Sarah, that maybe there should be an actual space to say, like, we would recommend if we do these changes, or like, here are things we could do to make this more just and equitable. So maybe like in the explanation area or somewhere down there, have like, here are things that we realized, oh, if we did these things, that would significantly improve this policy proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Kelly. And you actually so when you had mentioned that before, Sarah, about maybe flipping that narrative portion and then the rubric, so then maybe it feels less like that people are saying you do not pass go. You do not pass go straight to jail, that there is no place for you to then dive into the more narrative portions, because it's meant to ask that assessment in totality. So now that you've done this scoring piece, and now that you've also fleshed out those questions themselves, that now, in looking at it in totality, how are you feeling about it?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense for you yet? It could be flipped.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Kaya, maybe I'll stop sharing again. So next, next steps on this. So we're slated to present like our summary response comments and our sort of final version of this at the August Climate Council meeting, which means I think we do have another meeting before then, although we have lots of other things we want to do as a subcommittee. If Iris and Claire and anyone else, I want to invite more people to meetings, want to kind of come together, would that be the next step for us to kind of go back and flesh out some of this additional stuff and then bring it back to the group again?
Yes, I think that would be great. Thank you. Just wanting to, again, honor our time right now. So thank you so much, Sarah. This was really, really helpful. I hope that everybody's given this, so a little bit of food for thought, so we can come back with some more ideas. Please let Sarah know directly if you want to be a part of the further drafting of this work. Always helpful, as you can see, always helpful to have more voices in this space. So now I'm going to pass the mic to Jane to talk a little bit about the consultancy RFP around this, and then we're going to move on. We have a couple other items within the agenda. Public comment. Did anyone want to say anything?
I have a super quick question. I'll be brief because I know you guys have a lot more to cover. But just with the rubric, I'm wondering what the reason is to not have it in the rest of the guiding principles. Like, my assumption is that Kaya, you just kind of created as a separate document and never got integrated. But I do think that people could kind of miss the guiding principles and some of the kind of initial thinking that you guys put in the like main document. So I'm wondering, like, why would you not put it in the guiding principles? So just a comment and kind of question. But
it's a great question, Becca, and I think that they could be incorporated. It's meant to kind of be the worksheet you tear out of the back of the workbook, so that when you have to actually do the work, you have something to work from. So, but I think that would be great. See, I keep coming back to these education references. What's going on here? All right, so Jane, thank you very much. Any other, I don't know if there, David, do you count as public? Any other comments from anyone? Okay, Jane, take it away.
Good. Hi, everyone. So we in the past have talked about both here and now at the steering committee level and the climate council level, the feeling from the subcommittees and then ultimately at the council of how best, the worry I should say about how best they are going to do a job of both leading with the guiding principles as well as applying the scoring rubric independently themselves and questioning whether or not they had the expertise to bring to bear in a conversation around the application of the scoring rubric to their strategies and actions. I say strategies and actions because it does feel like we have to move into some sort of level of specificity in how the ideas are being implemented to get at understanding how equitably the ideas are being put on the ground. The pathways at a very high level are hard to decipher one way or another if they're equitable or not until you get to some level of detail. So with all of you, I think that the idea has been brought forward that at our last meeting, I believe, with all of you, that I would take a first shot at considering what a scope of services might look like to bring someone into the process, ideally someone who may be familiar with the process, recognizing the timeline that we're operating on and bringing someone in at such a late date. And worked with, although albeit on a quick turnaround, Sarah Ross McDonald and Stu Mintner on, I sent them a draft scope of services earlier this week. Mindful of time, I thought what I would do and want to highlight this is just highlight the intent of that scope of services one more time for all of you. And I'm happy to bring it up on screen and share it. I have it open on my computer, but recognizing that it's a bit wordy and there's comments that I've already gotten from Sarah that I haven't made all the changes yet. I'm also just happy to talk through it with all of you, get your blessing in concept, and then finalize it with the folks that I just mentioned, also others who are welcome to look at it offline. And then my intent is to move it through the process in a more simplified fashion than, and I think this is important as folks, if you choose to review the document, then perhaps we have with other work for the Climate Council, rather than RFP, where things are very spelled out, very detailed, have to be sort of like to the T. My intent is to use the proposal that I put together as an attachment, and then also work in collaboration with all of you to highlight a number of individuals who we think would be best suited to conduct this work, have an email where I send the scope of work as background with the guiding principles and the scoring rubric, and then intend to move forward with for a simplified bid process, which means that I just have to offer the work to 3 people, and have to, not all 3 people even have to bid. I only just have to offer it to 3 folks, but in the effort that I wouldn't have to post it for a long period of time, review proposals, all of that. The intent would be to try to move this out as quickly as possible so that the schedule that I have would have this person on board to work with the subcommittees by mid-September, and then come to the full council in October. And the new milestones that we've been working through would hopefully have this person participating in 2 council meetings, recognizing the enormity of the conversation and intent of just sort of the exhausting nature that it could bring. So to carry that conversation out across 2 council meetings. I also, as we think through it, recognize that on the timeline that we have, I don't imagine it would be a comprehensive look at every strategy and action being proposed by the subcommittees, and want to ask that of all of you. But as I've been revising the scope of work today, I've been thinking about how the pre-work for this kind of meeting or conversation with subcommittees and ultimately the council would be intended to identify some of the trickier, more ideas that need conversation around the application of the scoring rubric, and try to elevate, not dissimilar to how the subcommittees elevated strategies to be illustrative of their pathways this week, but try to elevate strategies and the actions that they've put detail to be illustrative, to engage around the conversation of equity, because you'll all remember that our intent of trying to do this in-house and with support given to the subcommittees and council is part of our commitment to operationalizing this work, and not sort of taking these scoring rubrics, giving it to somebody else to review, but rather fostering a dialogue and conversation about their application at the subcommittee level, recognizing it's just a start and that we'll have more work to do, but it's in an effort to train the people who we need to have, fluent in this conversation. And so that's my intent with this. It's also, and I was going to share this maybe later in my updates, but gotten me thinking a lot. And Julie and I, the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, and I reflected on some of the ideas put forward at Monday's council meeting that were thought of as cross-cutting ideas, some of which got at like a state equity board, and how policies and ideas are considered at a state level. And it's also gotten me thinking that it feels like there's a conversation to be had with the subcommittee around the idea of you not only doing the guiding principles and the scoring rubric, as well as thinking about your role in engagement, but I'm thinking that there is a role for some recommendations out of the subcommittee about how we implement the climate action plan and continue this work going forward. And I hadn't really made that connection, and maybe all of you had already, but it's been starting to resonate with me that there is a lot more work around this space, and how we do that, and how we think about that in the framing of the climate action plan and recommendations, I think would actually be really appropriate. So maybe that's a future subcommittee meeting where we review how we're doing it with other subcommittees and think about it. And we're starting to have that conversation with science and data also, because they're going to have recommendations from their subcommittee also that play into the climate action plan. So really important, I think, to think about all of that with you. So why don't I pause there and then say that I'm happy to just sort of bullet you through the scope of work, and also have you comment just on the breadth of what we're trying to do. And then from there, ask anybody, in addition to Ross, Sarah, and Sue, who are already on the hook, anybody else who might want to look at the scope of work outside of this meeting, to allow me to keep moving forward in a timely fashion. It's all sitting well.
I see you, Chris.
I was going to wait to see if anybody else wanted to go. The other, yeah, Jane, you need folk to review it now, right?
Yeah, in the next week.
So I'm on. I would volunteer, but I'm going to, honest to God, take a vacation. So
you should do it.
Yeah, you're right. That one of the things we've talked about a bit before in the committee, or maybe in my head I've talked about it, is, to my mind, this committee needs to be engaged beyond the report. We need to look at the whole life cycle, right? So ultimately it goes to rulemaking, it goes to legislative advocacy, or legislative testimony, implementation, evaluation of implementation, the whole thing, right? So it's a lot, and I don't know if folk are willing to go for that long a ride, but that would be my take on what the need is going to be.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah. So rather than share my screen to save you from all the words, I just want to walk through the bullets and just suggest that these are the areas we're considering for this work, and then happy to have others help and step up and review, but also know that we have a great team on board also to do that. But the scope of work speaks to, first and foremost, the facilitation of a review of the pathways, strategies, and actions at both the subcommittee level and the council level, as I suggested in my overview. It states a number of bullets, which first and foremost is to work specifically with the Just Transition Subcommittee and myself to design what those meeting agendas would look like and how to promote interaction with the subcommittee members and ultimately the council level folks. It talks about reaching out to subcommittees and council members in advance of those meetings for input on design also, and then I specifically identify a subset of strategies and actions to evaluate the application of the scoring rubric after having facilitated a conversation about the guiding principles application. It also talks about facilitating those meetings and then ultimately developing meeting summaries that are shared with the subcommittees and the council to ultimately inform and reshape, hopefully, the design of the actions. It talks about this person also supporting the steering committee and council through consultations and thinking about how above and beyond these meetings, there would likely be a role for this person to think about how to manage particularly difficult issues at the council and subcommittee level, and how to help manage interactions among the council and with our contractors as well. It also talks about assisting me with providing consultation advice, as well as to think through perhaps, as I had said earlier, thinking about how we might craft recommendations to advance this work in the implementation phase of the first climate action plan. And then I just do want to say that it goes on to ask about qualifications and then speak specifically to asking folks to speak to their experience with respect to facilitating these kinds of conversations, but also with their understanding of the Climate Council and body of work. And I really think this is going to be important in our selection of a person, largely because it's just going to be hard to step in at the 11th hour when a lot of things are all coming together, and someone who's not intimately aware of how the system works and the work to date will make it more challenging to hit the ground running. So that'll be helpful as we think through who to ask to bid on this work. And specifically, I just think it'll be important to have somebody who already has familiarity with the process. So like I suggested, I'm trying to be brief and succinct in the way I'm drafting it, but clear enough. And I also think that it'll be important, just to have a conversation with the people. And that's what I like about a simplified bid process, is just a simpler process to get somebody on board than going through an RFP. But I'm really hopeful that it gets at some of our core work with operationalizing this work, as well as truly applying in a transparent way the scoring rubric around the actions being developed for the Climate Council plan. So that's really all I have, and look forward to hearing folks' comments or thoughts on this. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, Jane, are you looking for people's feedback on the process itself, or you're just explaining the process in terms of like, I'm going to do a simplified bid instead of an RFP? Can you just clarify?
Yeah, sorry, maybe I'm just like a state person and going into too much detail around that component of the work. I would really love to hear from you if A, you're generally in agreement with this idea still, any of the specifics of what I talked about, like a recognition that we can't review every action likely, because like ag and ecosystems hasn't even gotten to the action development, but they have 80 to 90 strategies. And then whatever those strategies are that they choose to elevate and implement actions for are probably going to have another, another laundry list of actions. So I think that there's going to be a recognition that there's just a time issue. So does that feel possible to even pick reflective strategies and actions? Does that even sit with you all? And then that component of it, beyond just thinking about the role of facilitation and having the conversation at that level, does it all feel right? And if it generally feels right, even though maybe shortchanged a bit, mindful of time, does it feel like something you'd like to weigh in more detail on through an email conversation?
I have a question. Are you considering any of the contractors we're already using? Can we just expand one of the existing contracts rather than doing a simplified bid?
We haven't. That's really interesting. We could not, I guess, some of the stuff, like we most recently thought about Climate Access and RISE have a lot of experience. There are outreach and engagement consultants in marketing materials and like editing. And so we thought about amending their contract to help like beautify the climate action plan and make it look like a snazzy document. And that was actually determined out of scope from their RFP. So I wasn't able to just simply amend their contract and add in that, even though, so I think that I imagine this would feel out of scope, although David, you are online and you are a facilitator online for facilitation services. And it actually does speak to CBI's contract. Well, in CBI's contract, it speaks to facilitating difficult conversations and sticky issues. And I mean, you could probably think that CBI could do this if CBI, and David, we've not talked about this at all, like completely off the record. So if CBI felt like this was something that they could do, that would be possible. It says David's here, but maybe he's taking a break. So hard.
Hi,
I'm
here.
Mute.
No,
David.
sorry, I'm just driving, so it's yeah. I mean, I think this is the kind of thing where it benefits from thinking what the right expertise is and who those actual people or person is, and so I think we're open to being helpful. I think there are probably people who are even better positioned than we are, and we could help find those individuals.
That's great. Thanks, David.
I would say I think a simplified bid is the way to go. If you can't do a sole source, then just do it. Get the names and put it out there.
See, I knew there was another state person who got excited about, the contracting process. I spoke for you, Jennifer. Thanks.
I wouldn't want to exaggerate too much, but
I appreciate that. So I am wanting to be thoughtful of our time. We originally had this listed as wrapping up at 5:40. Wanted to give an opportunity again for a public comment, and we were supposed to report back from our other subgroups and talk about community engagement. I don't know if there's specific highlights that we want to name as far as dates of things that might be happening, but we have like this much time. So I want to honor whatever we can. So let me at least carve out the space for public comment if there was anything that anyone wanted to raise around this. I do see your comment, Iris. I'm just... Yeah. Okay. So Iris placed in the chat, she wanted to briefly clarify, the consultant will not do every action, but the subcommittees will end up assessing them right.
I was responding, but I think that's a great question. And I honestly don't know. I've had extreme pushback on the actual application of the scoring rubric for every action. So that's a good question to have. And it's a good question that we should facilitate and have when we have a council meeting, to make a clear expectation at the council level of what will happen through the application of the consultant if we choose to go that route, and with the idea perhaps that consultant would be giving them the training they need to then do their best job at using the scoring rubric for all of their actions. But yeah, we'd want to make sure we clarify that.
Yeah, I just want to note that's super concerning to me that we would consider not doing every action, because then the ones that we are choosing to do are subjective and we are not choosing them with equity in mind. And I think that there has already been a lot of hesitancy to actually use this tool, and I'm really scared that it's not actually going to get baked into the work that the way that we are intending. That's that's one of my big fears in this process.
Thank you for naming that, Iris. Thank you. Yes, so for sure. So yeah, drafting team. Thinking about how to best identify that and outline that within the scope of work that consultant might do will be important. What that role is in distinction from the work of the committees themselves, who should, if you're coming with 90 proposals, you should have at least taken a first pass for you to even show up with 90. You should, basically. So thank you. I see David's hand raised.
Thanks, Kaya. I just want to say to Iris's point that I think as the subcommittees are coming back to the council with a package of ideas and doing their work, that there will be some necessity to get from 80 to something manageable. And so there is no human way that subcommittees can do enough analysis on 80 ideas between now and the time we need to start making decisions, October, November. So there's going to be a process to get to a more manageable number so that analysis can be done on the ideas that are being put forward into the climate action plan. There has to be time to do that analysis.
I would just say part of that is using our guiding principles, because if we are highlighting and prioritizing strategies, there needs to be an equity component there.
Absolutely. That's the point. It has to be a number in which you can actually do enough analysis so the council feels confident that analysis has been done with an equity lens and the other lenses we're trying to put on.
Thank you for that. Okay, any further comments? We're almost to 5:45. What are we feeling, group, that we want to do? Do we want to hear back from the other committees? I see Sarah's hand, yes.
Well, I think we don't have time for tonight, but we did want to tee up that we were going to invite back our public engagement consultant in 2 weeks. And we just wanted to also, and so we won't have the conversation to tee that up. I think that's okay. But just to say that that's what we're planning to have them back to talk a little bit more in depth about what's going to happen over the next 2 months around public engagement. And then also thinking about what we all as subcommittee members may want to be doing, like a no pressure, not like subcommittee members, you're expected to do this, but like what we want to be doing, and then what we need from our consultants so that we can do the work that we want to be doing around engagement with our community, right? So I think we were hoping to start that conversation tonight, but maybe it's not tonight, and we'll hopefully have that conversation next time. And then Kaya, I just really quickly want to confirm, I sent out the meeting invitations for August to continue on this every other week schedule, but that was an assumption on my part that that's what our subcommittee wanted to do. So hopefully we can just confirm that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so are we comfortable with doing every other week? Going once monthly at this point probably isn't terribly wise. Whatever's going to be most efficient for us, correct? So like in a meaningful way, right? So Jane, I see your hand up.
Sorry, I don't want to take us back, but I do just want to draw your attention, and for folks who may not check their state email partner accounts, you all received the public engagement plan a little while ago as a PDF, and have the opportunity as subcommittee members and council members to comment on it by the end of day next Wednesday. And there's a survey that was included in that email intended to use for your comments. So the Survey Monkey is where you should enter your comments. And so I really do, especially this subcommittee, encourage you to look at the public engagement plan and comment on it and let us know what you think. So thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, please go take a look at that. That'll be helpful as well. It does have information and I think as well some dates that might be really important to keep in mind. Just briefly, as a point of business, are we meeting bi-weekly or is it bi-monthly? I think they'd be the same, don't they? Bi-weekly, every other week? Does that still feel right for folks? Okay, all right. Y'all get a little bit of break and some space. Okay, so we're going to maintain that. Thank you very much for that, Sarah. Appreciate it. So thank you. We talked a little bit about the public engagement. Is there anything we need to hear back as truly important, recognizing we are over time, but I did want to give space if there was reports back from the other subcommittees that folks needed to bring into this space today. Okay. Okay. Well, I think we kind of made our way through the agenda, and I'm so grateful. And hey, y'all, my internet didn't cut out. We were able to do this and have great success. So I'm very excited that we were able to share this space. Jane is about to say something. Yes.
Oh, I really want to see Kelly's baby's face.
Oh, we got the belly too. We got face and belly, y'all. Face and belly. You're missing out if you are not joining us. Thank you. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. David, I see your hand raised from the vehicle.
Yeah, I just wanted to, on the public engagement plan, offer a space if subcommittee members have any questions right now they want to pose to me or Jane or Sarah or Kaya or others. Because this is moving quickly. There is this week to comment on the plan. While there will be discussion in your next meeting, this is a chance real quick. We want to just put 2 minutes on this. If folks have questions about it, we'd be happy to answer those questions right now. So Kaya, if you're up for that, I just want to open that space if folks had questions about what's being proposed in the public engagement plan.
For sure. Is there anyone that has comments to add at this point? Is everyone reviewing the public engagement plan right now?
I think people are fried too. After an hour and 45 minutes.
Okay, so for sure, if you have had this, if you do have questions, please feel free to send them along to us. Do not hesitate. In addition, please go ahead if you can and take the Survey Monkey, or if that doesn't work for you as a way to give your feedback, again, we'll take it in any form that we can, just to make sure that voices are informed here. And it's like Sarah said, that she'll be willing to include that in our follow-up emails to other members who are not here as well, who won't, for that opportunity one more time. So thank you. All right. Well, it does appreciate, and so Sarah also said she's willing to have a phone call with folks on this. My goodness. So I do want to thank everyone for your time here today, and we are going to meet again in 2 weeks. Please keep an eye on your emails. Visit the state website for any of the documents that we referred to today that are ready to post. There will be some others coming your way as well, and always grateful to do this work with you, each and every one of you. Thank you so much on behalf of the Vermont Climate Council. We'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thanks, Kaya.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.